Alright lads, welcome to the first of hopefully many reviews of the latest Danger Zone War Thunder update. Today we're going to be covering probably the most hyped vehicle that has been added to War Thunder probably in the game's entire existence. But was it worth the wait? Personally, I'm going to say no, which may come as a quite surprise, but I'll get into it shortly. Anyway, the basics. This is the F-14A early. Now, while many people know the F-14 as being an absolute monster in terms of powerful engines, high top speed, being pretty badass in general, that all comes with the F-14B model, not the F-14A. In fact, the F-14A was notorious for having engine stalls and having pretty mediocre engine performance. Now that all was solved in the F-14B model, and it did become the monster that we all know and love. But right now in War Thunder, the F-14A isn't particularly amazing when it comes to its power to weight ratio. For example, the Kafia C7 just absolutely destroys it in terms of the actual thrust to weight. But anyway, I'm getting distracted. Let's get back to the basics. The F-14A early is a jet fighter in the 7th rank of the American tech tree, coming in at battle rating 11.3 for realistic and arcade battles, but drops down to 11.0 for simulator battles. To unlock the plane, you're going to have to grind out 400,000 research points before purchasing it for the cost of 1,080,000 silver lions. Because this is a top tier vehicle, I would highly recommend getting the expert in ace qualifications if you can. It costs 1,080,000 silver lions for the expert qualification and 3,200 golden eagles for the ace qualification. These are very expensive, but it is well worth it if you can afford it. To put the F-14 in a lineup, it will cost you 310,000 silver lions. And to repair the vehicle, it's 10,000 silver lions when stock, and when fully spaded, that rises to 15,164 silver lions. Needless to say, it's a lot cheaper than crashing one in real life. Being a naval fighter, the F-14A comes behind the F-4A in the American tech tree, and naturally, the F-14 uses all of the US Navy weaponry. For example, you can't use the AIM-9GAs on this plane. So anyway lads, that's enough rambling. Am I being stupid by saying this thing is just mediocre? Or is it the best plane in the game? Should you run home, turn on your computer, whap out your credit card, and GE your way to it? Well, Guardian would certainly want you to do that, but if you want to hear my opinion, then you're going to have to stick around for the rest of the video. Alright boys, welcome back. So with all my vehicle reviews, we're going to start with the engines. And the F-14A obviously has two. These are the Pratt & Whitney TF30s. At military power, or 100%, they produce 4,860 kilograms of thrust. But when reheating, or afterburning, that thrust increases to 8,020 kilos of thrust. For comparison, you basically have two Kafia engines bolted onto this aircraft. But again, while this is impressive, the F-14A is a very heavy aircraft, and the acceleration that you feel is kind of mediocre. It's nowhere near as good as the Kafia or some of the other lighter fighters in the game, while the acceleration of the F-14 is pretty decent. As soon as you come off that afterburner, the plane does feel a bit like a brick. You just lose that speed incredibly quickly. This isn't an issue per se. You can take a full tank of fuel on this plane, which is 59 minutes. You can also take 30 minutes or 45 minutes. I usually take 45 for a standard game and a full tank for an EC game. I'd recommend basically just using your afterburner all the time when you need thrust and cutting down to 0 power when you want to be slowed down a little bit. So either afterburn or no power at all. You can use the military power or 100% power when you're just cruising, but as I said, you will drop speed dramatically. While the engines are slightly above average, this plane is very quick however, especially at the higher altitudes in game where this plane was designed to operate. For those of you who don't know, the F-14 was basically a carrier defense fighter. They were kind of like the Spitfire in World War II, where they were designed basically just to protect an asset. They take off from a carrier, fly towards incoming enemies, shoot them down, then return home. While the F-14 did have some ground attack capability, this was an afterthought and didn't really become present until the F-14Bs. Now this was mainly due to a lack of funding at the time of the F-14As, But the point I'm trying to make is that the F-14 was specialised as a high altitude interceptor. But if you've ever played War Thunder and played top tier jet matches, high altitude is a great way to get yourself killed by a Fox 1 missile, such as an AIM-7. So fights don't really happen at that altitude. Down at sea level, where pretty much everybody is at a max of 1.2 Mach because everyone's wings would just simply rip off any faster, the speed of the F-14 isn't too important, to be honest. The F-4E, F-4J, MiG-23s, they can all go Mach 1.2 something. It's like we're kind of back to the good old days of the MiG-15 and the F-86 Sabre, where one is slightly faster than the other, but it doesn't make a huge difference. So unless you're planning on climbing to Angel's 40, then the speed of the F-14A isn't going to be that much of an issue in game, really. It isn't going to give you a huge advantage over enemy players. There are some advantages to the engine and flight performance of the F-14, and that mainly comes in the variable geometry wings. The F-14 is a swing wing aircraft. However, as with all other swing wing aircrafts in the game, this is largely a gimmick. If you get low and slow and try and do a dogfight with an enemy player, it's a great way to get yourself shot down by a third party. So I'd never recommend actually trying to dogfight in any plane, but if it is a strictly one-on-one fight, then the F-14 can by far beat any other plane in the game. Its wings are so big, it's just got such a high lifting force that you can't outturn pretty much everything, as long as you start on a similar energy level, of course. But what I'm trying to say is, the speed and the mobility of this plane isn't its main advantages in terms of War Thunder. While great in real life, it's just not really a way that War Thunder is played at top tier. You stay incredibly fast, and you just boom and zoom, firing a few missiles off at a time. Basically playing this like the way the F-100 was back in the day. The real advantage of the F-14 arguably comes in its weapons. But first, let's go over its radar, as in my opinion, this is one excellent feature of this aircraft. This is the AN-AWG-9, which features look down, IFF or identify friend and foe, BVR or beyond visual range, as well as ACM mode or air combat maneuver. The radar has a range of 203 kilometers, which is pretty far and pretty much overkill for all the maps in War Thunder at the minute, but it does feature several different types of radar settings, which are very helpful. You have the standard search radar, which is pretty much the default. You then also have pulse Doppler, as well as TWS, or track while scan. To simplify TWS immensely, it basically allows you to track a target while just scanning it, which I know sounds stupid just saying it like that, but it allows you to guide a missile onto a target without giving the enemy a radar lock. The enemy will still get the radar spike from the search radar, but it shouldn't get that solid tone radar lock noise. And in the grand scheme of top tier War Thunder at the minute, having one additional beep on your RWR, you aren't really going to know that a Phoenix has been launched at you in that scenario. So in theory, it is very powerful, and there is a reason that track while scan radars are still used to this day. Anyway, if we take a quick look at the pilot, you can see that we have a CCIP, or constantly calculated impact point, for the cannons, rockets, bombs. So again, pretty decent radar and avionics suite in this plane. Now with all the good American planes at top tier, our primary weapon is the 20mm M61A1 cannon, the Vulcan, the gun that we all know and love. Now you actually have more rounds of ammunition for this gun than you do in the actual F4 Phantoms, with 676 rounds. The high fire rate of 6,000 rounds per minute, as well as the recent buff to actual cannon rounds, makes this gun probably the most powerful weapon in War Thunder at the minute. That is quite a hot take, but I think certainly at top tier, the 20mm is by far the most powerful weapon. I see more F-14s getting killed with its actual gun than with rockets mainly. But everybody that's played top tier War Thunder loves and fears this Vulcan. It shreds absolutely anything, and it's particularly dangerous in a heads-on. We then also have a range of dumbfire bombs. We have 250 pounders, 500 pounders, 1000 pounders, and 2000 pounders. This does make the F-14 quite flexible in a ground realistic match if you want to do some very high speed casts. But again, if you are serious about playing ground realistic battles, then I'd always recommend actually taking a helicopter instead of a plane. They're a lot more flexible and survivable. While they don't have as high a payload, there is a reason that helicopters are despised by tank players. We then also have Zuni rockets. These were basically a blend between anti-personnel and anti-bunker. They have very high penetration as well as quite a lot of spalling. But you can only carry 16 of them on each pylon. I wouldn't really recommend taking them. You don't really want to be doing rocket salvos in an F-14. It's pretty pointless in my opinion, but it's America, we have freedom, you can do what you want, I guess. So boys, on to the missiles. And because this is a Navy jet, we of course have the Navy Sidewinder variants. Up first, and when this plane comes stock, you will have the AIM-9Ds. You're probably familiar with the Ds by now. They're what the British used as well as the Americans. They're not terrible, to be honest. They're actually pretty decent. They're a lot better than the Bs. Arguably better than the E variant as well of the US Air Force. But things do improve when we unlock the AIM-9Gs. These are basically the AIM-9Ds with a lot bigger seeker head, as well as better flight characteristics. These missiles are pretty decent, but we also have, new to the game, the AIM-9Hs. Now for people who aren't familiar, the US Navy missiles, because you had to land on a carrier, that meant having quite a large shock being applied to them every time they took off and landed, which didn't really do it that well for reliability. Obviously the early missiles were built in like the late 50s, early 60s, before high-tech computing was a thing, so it used something called a vacuum tube. As you can imagine, essentially a piece of glass, and when this thing was combined with actually a very rough carrier landing, those glass vacuum tubes could break, and then obviously when you went to launch a missile in combat, it wouldn't work. So the AIM-9H was basically a Sidewinder variant that didn't have any vacuum tubes. I believe it was the first AIM-9 to have semiconductors. So in real life, this made this version of the Sidewinder much more reliable and actually had the highest kill rate, I think, in the Vietnam War. But in War Thunder, it doesn't really do too much for us, to be honest. I believe it did have better tracking as well as better maneuverability, but it just does feel like a slightly better AIM-9G. Nice addition to the game. You can carry it several different configurations, 2 or 4. But the Sidewinders aren't the biggest actual new thing in this plane. And while in the last patch it was widely considered that the Fox 1 or the Sparrow missiles were considered dead, nobody really used them anymore. Arguably in this patch, with the radar of the F-14, maybe Fox 1 meta is back. Anyway, we get 3 different types of Fox 1 missiles or semi-active radar homing. You start with the AIM-7E, similar to the AIM-7 that's found on the F-4E, I believe. It's quite a decent missile. It's not the best. In fact, the next missile that we get, the AIM-7F, is by far a much better missile. While it has similar flight characteristics to the earlier E variant, it is much longer ranged. Now it does have the same downside, being that you have to maintain a radar lock. But again, because the F-14's radar is so good, that means that the only way to really counter the AIM-7F is to notch the radar of the F-14, forcing enemy players to both chaff as well as maneuver, causing them to break lock on their own radar on you, or to pull out of an attack on one of your friendlies. This is an incredibly powerful weapon system that the F-14 has. And then a quick side note, in this update, the Japanese F-4EJ Kai 2 also got AIM-7Fs, and because that thing has the F-16 radar, this is also a very good tactic to use in that jet. But, as I'm guessing you all know, the F-14 got another new toy, the AIM-54A Phoenix. This is the first Fox 3 missile in the game, I believe. This is where the F-14's track while scan radar comes into its own. To fire these, you have to put the radar into track while scan. You can then pick up enemy targets. You can designate a target. The Phoenix will then launch and track into that target. At the last minute, the Phoenix will turn on its own radar, which it has in its seeker, and hopefully hit the impact target. Now this works great in theory, and it did work especially well against bombers and other large targets. But in War Thunder, where you get a large red box around enemy incoming missiles, these don't work too well. Now, at the start of a game, when everyone is like alt-tabbing and going to watch, I don't know, some Morbius 2 meme that I don't understand, maybe you can get a few kills with these Phoenixes. I've had quite a lot of success actually, taking off, climb, launch my Phoenixes at the start of a game and then just go low and get kills with Sidewinders. That's a pretty good tactic that's worked for me. Just want to bear in mind, against an enemy player that knows what he's doing, you aren't going to be getting Phoenix kills with them. The Phoenixes are pretty slow, and while they do have long range, as I've said, they do trade top speed for that. They climb very high in the sky, which makes them a very obvious target because they do contrail. So if you do use the Phoenixes, I would just fire them off at the start of a game. All four, just launch them. There's no point carrying them mid and late game. So naturally this begs the question as to what weapons should you use on the F-14A. Well, personally I've been running a mix. I've been running 4 AIM-9Hs and 4 Phoenixes. And alternatively I've got a setup with 2 AIM-9Hs and 6 AIM-7Fs. Now the latter, the AIM-7F loadout, that is a lot better in the mid to late stage of a game, but the Phoenix setup is better in the beginning stage of a game. I can't really give you a definitive answer on what is the best setup to use on the F-14. If you're a very good player, then the Sparrow setup will definitely be the better choice. But for me, I'm not the best top tier jet pilot, so the Phoenix missile is probably the better one for me. It's not a guaranteed kill at the start of a game, but it does force enemies to maneuver. So boys, was the F-14 overhyped? Yes, I'm going to say it is. While its flight performance is impressive, especially if you try to dogfight in it, you will win the dogfight, but you're probably going to get shot down immediately by some other jet that's going faster than you. The acceleration is good, but it isn't good enough where you can out-accelerate any jet that has a slight energy advantage on you. It still adheres to the laws of thermodynamics. You can't just go Mach 2 as soon as you press shift on the keyboard. It is quite an even match between several other jets. Maybe not one-on-one, but certainly in top tier War Thunder battles where you get swarmed. The slightly better performance of the F-14 compared to like a MiG-23. It's not gonna win the day if you make a shit mistake or you do something wrong. Pilot skill is ultimately a lot more important at the minute. Even with the good radar and the Phoenixes, I'd say the skill of the pilot, not so much the skill but the knowledge, like not doing certain things or knowing when to do something, when to run away, when to turn, etc. Anyway, if you want to watch more important video, well not important but more knowledgeable videos, I'd highly recommend Seek Ahead. He has a lot of good content for jets in general, as well as the F-14. But anyway lads, do take what I say with a pinch of salt. I do play jets quite a lot, but that doesn't mean I'm good at it. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. I'm going to go downstairs now and eat a pizza. I don't know why I told you that. Maybe you can close your eyes and enjoy it. Anyway, it's late. I don't know what I'm saying. I may be going insane. Anyway, if you liked the video, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing. And if you loved it, consider becoming a channel member. Like T, Biff Webster, Tomato Salad, Daboa LX, Just Someone, Destroyer 1805, Dr. Bob, Tans, William Tessier, and Lola Alfonso. Thanks again for the support lads, and as always, thank you very much for watching.